Hey everybody, my name's Brendan and today we're going to talk about decision making. So, what do you think makes a good decision maker? Too many makings going on in that sentence, but let's be quite honest. It's impossible to go through our daily lives without making decisions, let alone in the business context. So what is decision making? Quite simply, it's the process of making choices by identifying a decision, gathering information, and then assessing the alternatives. Sounds really simple. Well, it can be. The problem is, we are inundated in our daily lives in order to make decisions and bombarded with all this information. Therefore, it can be really difficult to distill the right information in order to make the decisions. But why is decision making important? Fundamentally, you can't ignore them. That's it. You're going to have to make decisions on a daily basis, whether you like it or not. Sorry, although if you are an adult, I'm sure you've done this already. Taking the easy path is also not an option. Well, it's certainly not a long-term option. Just avoiding the difficult decisions means that you're going to get yourself in a real pickle at some point, because every time you come to a fork in the road, you take the easy option, you take the easy option, you take the easy option. You're going to end up in a situation that you probably don't want to be in. Then the only person you've got to blame is yourself. Well, sorry, too bad, not my problem. This will ultimately catch up with you, and I don't think in a good way. Why take the path of least resistance? You want an easy life? Fine. Don't leave the house. Don't put yourself in any danger. Don't do anything that takes you outside of your comfort zone. But ultimately, you will not reach where you want to get to. Then who do you have to blame? Nobody other than yourself. Now, I'm not here to be all sort of high and mighty about it, far from it, but the point is, every time we come to a decision point, the decision that sits with you, you are responsible for that, and you need to take ownership for it. So, if you want an easy life, just keep saying yes or no to everything and take the easy option and go down the path of least resistance and be done with it. That's fine. But I'm here to tell you that avoiding the difficult decisions is not the right way to go. In a business context, the chances are you're going to have to lead people and teams, maybe even entire companies. In actual fact, if you become good at making decisions and make good decisions, your teams will know that you have their best interests at heart. It's easy for people to buy into you if you not only show the approach that you take in your decision making, but also make good decisions. Now, we don't always know the decisions that we make at the time, whether they're going to turn out to be good or bad. But if we're able to rationalize why we made a decision, chances are that those around us will buy into it. They might not agree with it, but they'll understand where we're coming from. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but when I was training as an accountant, one of the things that's always stuck with me and will apply to the decision making that I take is, if anything you do, if it hit the front page of the Daily Mail, would you be embarrassed? Now, let's put aside to the fact that you might know people that read the Daily Mail, but the point is, if you hit the front page and your actions in that headline were to embarrass you, don't do it. That's a broad brush statement, and I get it, but ultimately, decision making actually boils down to the values in which you hold dear. For me, integrity is massively important. Now, I probably haven't told this to many people, but if I feel like my integrity is being questioned, then I know that can give me anxiety. So all of a sudden, my values and my integrity becomes enormously important to me. So I'm going to hold that really close when I go into my decision-making process. It's easy to get caught up in all of the bombardment of information, as I've said previously, but what makes you you is ultimately how you portray yourself as a decision maker and the approach that you take when making decisions, especially when they can impact others. Now, taking that on board, what makes a good decision maker? Well, quite simply, those who seek out others' opinions around them helps. There's no point being surrounded by yes men or yes women that just tell you what you need to know, because that leads you down the path of least resistance. The avenues where you are not in control. It's always nice for somebody to say you're doing a great job and you're making the right decisions and you're doing whatever you need to. But having that active challenge is really important. Challenge your own assumptions. Challenge the rationale that you've used to make that decision. More often than not, the assumptions you've used might still be correct. It might still be just as applicable, but why not test it out? Rather, ask the hard questions up front, rather than at the end when the decision has been made and the consequences are in action. Makes sense, right? What are the attributes of good decision making? Well, firstly, they positively impact others or those around you. It's easy to see when a bad decision is made, everybody will say, well, I definitely wouldn't have done it that way. Hindsight goggles, again, are a wonderful thing, but the point is, good decision making positively impacts others. So that's number one. Number two, it's replicable. The process that you took and the approach that you took in getting to that decision can be repeated. Again, that sounds obvious, but the point is, why get really good at doing bespoke one-off things when the chances are, and the principles that you took in making that decision need to be applied again, but perhaps in a different scenario? If that's the case, having something that can be repeated time again when the pressure's on and it's really stressful is really important. Now, everybody will come up with their own specific approach, but the point is, good decisions are replicable. Number three, they foster opportunity. Again, something that's really dear to my heart is empowering others. Empowering others means that you kind of bring people on the journey, you get the best out of them, you help them to grow. Good decision making fosters opportunity because it can empower others to move forwards. Whether that be giving somebody, a junior, a chance to take on something that would normally be outside of their remit, or in a family setting, encouraging a sibling to undertake a particular challenge. It doesn't matter. But good decision making fosters opportunity. Number four, includes others. So this goes back to the comment I made a moment ago around being surrounded by yes men or yes women. The point is, you want to seek out others' opinions, challenge your own assumptions, and then if you're in that position of power, then go with it. But wouldn't it be great to challenge the assumptions up front by using those people around you whose opinions you value and building that into your decision making? Number five, sounds obvious, but it's executable. Clarity is what brings around good decisions. Removing uncertainty, it goes hand in hand with clarity. If you're able to be clear of mind in the decision making, you can remove the uncertainty, both whether it be from a self-doubt, a personal perspective, or the noise around you. It means that you give yourself the best possible chance of moving forward with a good decision. Number six, it is systematic. Now, what's the criteria, good or bad? What are the resources? What are the clear requirements? Clear requirements, massively important in making good decisions. All of these wrapped together in a bundle that says, can we make it systematic? Can we take the manual elements out of it if it were a process? Well, you'd hope so, because machines can make decisions quicker than humans can if they're given the parameters and the clear requirements to do so. So when it comes to your decision making, is it systematic or is it a little bit all over the place? I'll leave that one for you. Number seven, accountable. The decisions you make, you become accountable for. It's not easy to hide behind something that outlines in great detail the roles, the responsibilities, and expectations associated with that outcome. It's far too easy to be slopey-shouldered and just palm off the accountability for a decision. Don't let that be you. As I mentioned earlier in the video, the values piece for me is hugely important, and so taking that on board, like, be brave, make a decision, stand by it, be accountable. Number 8, try and get the fingers right, be pragmatic. The Navy SEALs talk about decision making in terms of 3 elements. Let me get this right. The mission, the team, the individual. I'll tell you now, they tell me that the individual is the one that comes last. So who does the decision serve? Make sure that's aligned with the overall objectives, make sure that it's really clear, and then go after it. Each decision, like a Rubik's Cube. Every time you get the cube in the right place just to move into the next sort of set of squares adds up to make a really powerful decision in the end. Obviously, in the Rubik's Cube example, you end up with all the colours on the right side if you haven't taken it apart and put it back together again and cheated. Let's skip over that for now. So, be pragmatic. And number 9, something like that, self-awareness. Are you cognizant of operating within your circle of influence? Are you pushing the boundaries around where your comfort levels are and your ability to execute on that? Are you operating in a new sphere of influence around, friends, families, colleagues, pupils, whatever it might be? You've got to be massively self-aware of the impact of not only the decision that you're making, but the impact it has on others. The situation, the company, the project, the people, you're renovating your house. Are you actually able to do that? Are you capable of coping with the stresses and strains, or are you completely out of your depth? Now, being out of your depth isn't actually not necessarily a bad thing. You just need to learn where your skills lie and bring in others to help you where you feel like you fall short. So what's the approach in making a decision? I'm sure you'll probably come up with your own ones, but let me go through the steps that I believe are the integral parts of making good decisions. Number 1, you want to identify the decision that's being made. This could be classification, whether it's a generic or a specific decision, but ultimately you need to be able to define the decision that needs to be made, or probably identify it first and then define it. Sounds silly, but it's what I would call the exam question. What is the question that you're trying to answer? Because then if you can define that, you know what success looks like, and if you know what success looks like, you know the time, money and effort in order to get there. Different story, same application. Once you've identified the decision, you need to gather the information. Where does it sit? What does it look like? What are the data sets that you don't have? What's the information that you would like? What are the information sets or the details that you just won't get? So you'll have to put to one side or acknowledge that you might not be able to make a fully formed decision because you haven't got that. Gather the information that you can. Then you need to identify the alternatives. It's really important that you don't bring preconceived ideas into this decision-making process, because that's where unconscious bias or preconceived implications of what's happened in previous lives and previous work and experience can begin to distort your decision-making process. Once you've got all that, you need to weigh up all the evidence. How does it feel? What does it look like? What are the information? What are the details telling you? Once you've got that evidence, you need to choose amongst the alternatives. One may jump out at you and be crystal clear because you've gone through the process that you go through and it ticks all the boxes. But that approach might not be viable. So what's the alternative? Generally, there's an opportunity cost, i.e. the implications of not doing something to get to where you want to be, that need to be considered. Don't avoid those opportunity costs, because I guarantee you, if you do, they will come back to bite you. And that is a painful process. Bite you metaphorically, not actually bite you, unless I guess you're dealing with animals or something, and then in that case anyway, go off on a tangent. Once you've chosen your alternatives, or you've got the avenue that you want to go down, take action. As Tony Robbins says, massive change is led by massive action. Take action. Do something. As I've heard in the past, better make a bad decision than no decision. Well, do you agree with that? Yes, no, maybe. I don't really care, because the point of telling you this is if you make a decision, you've taken action, you've taken control, and you've moved things forward. Hopefully the outcome will be good. Well, if it is good, you are further along than you were, and you've no longer just been stood where you are. If it's a bad decision, at least you know more than you did before. Why was it a bad decision? Were your assumptions wrong? What changed? What did you not consider? The Donald Rumsfeld unknown unknowns. How did you come to that conclusion? And then finally, you want to review your decision and the consequences associated with it thereof. So it's very much an iterative process. What works for me, using those 7 steps, may work for you. You might want to tweak them ever so slightly. But the point is, by creating a logical, methodical, and systematic approach, you know that it can be repeated. You also know that if somebody comes back to you and says, why did you take this approach? Well, you can say, well, I gathered the information based on this. These were my assumptions. This is the approach that I went through. And this is the action that I took. All of a sudden it becomes a really comprehensive and coherent argument. Well, I'd rather talk to somebody around the assumptions that I made in bringing that decision to life than somebody poke fun or pull apart the decision-making process in itself. Now, I've talked in the past around how you can minimize bad decisions. Now, I call these one-way doors. Working on a particular piece of work or a project or an endeavor, I want to create as little one-way doors as possible. Now, a one-way door is a decision which is really difficult to reverse or impossible to reverse. So therefore, you want to create two-way doors. Think about it from a restaurant perspective. If you're going into the kitchen, the chances are that you go in through the door that says in, and it's a single swing door. So you can't come out the way in. Well, once you're in the kitchen, the only way to carry on is either stay in the kitchen or to come out, and it can be quite painful to come out. That doesn't quite work, but hopefully the situation applies itself. So what you really want is one of those swingway doors so you can get in and out. A very tenuous example, but the point I'm trying to make is keep to a minimum those decisions which lock you into a direction which doesn't allow you to pivot, change, or alter your course if need be. Now, I don't want you to keep flip-flopping and change your decisions on a regular basis, because that begins to erode some of the confidence that you build up with your colleagues and your peers and your friends. But conversely, if you're able to limit the number of one-way doors that you make, you give yourselves opportunities. So what are the challenges that you may face in making good decisions? Well, one might be indecision. Analysis by paralysis. Paralysis by analysis might be one of those. You've just been bombarded with all this information. You think, what the dickens am I going to do with it? So you sit there and you just think, gosh, okay, I'll take my time. I'll take my time. And by which point, the moment's passed, the decision has already been made by somebody else, and you're left sat there none the wiser. Not ideal, far from it. Another one of those challenges you may face is decision by committee. A bit like stocks and shares, everybody is going to have an opinion, whether you like it or not. So just be careful who you engage when you want to make a decision. Now, I'm sure you can see, if you said to somebody, what do you think the price of Tesla is going to do over the next 3 months? Everybody's going to tell you what they think, whether they're advocates and fans of Elon Musk, or they think it's an overpriced company and it's destined to fail. Well, it's very binary. It's quite Marmite-esque in that regard. And decision-making can be the same, especially when it comes to large decisions, because everybody will have an opinion. So just be aware of decision by committee. Now, there are benefits of doing that in certain instances. It needs to be specific and quite well thought through. Reversals. I'm really confident, I've made the decision. Actually, maybe that wasn't the right option. Shit, what am I going to do? Actually, I changed my mind. This is it. We're absolutely certain this is the path. Yep. Maybe not. I take that back. It reminds me of Major Ingram, actually, from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I don't know whether you've seen the documentary or the TV series, but it's exactly that moment. You're absolutely sure, and then you change your mind. And then you're absolutely sure on that, and then you change your mind again. How he got away with it is unbelievable. But I mean, that's a different piece. I mean, sure, if you follow US politics at the moment, they're talking about correcting the corrections, i.e. U-turns. But these are all challenges that you and those around you will face when making decisions. Decision making is both an art and a science. That means it can be specific for you, but you can follow guidelines and approaches and systematize these to help you get the best possible outcomes on the greatest number of occasions. We can't minimize risk. We can't remove uncertainty, but we can give ourselves a very good platform to help make good decisions going forwards. Now, to help you going forwards, I'm going to just talk very quickly around a few decision-making models that you can use to help you in everyday life, in your business world, in your family life, whatever it might be. So the first one is called RAPID and was, I believe, created by Bain & Company. So RAPID stands for recommend, agree, perform, input, decide. Now, I'll add details on where to find further explanation of these models in the descriptions, but it's become a really good model to help create thinking and understand what's going on. The RAPID model works best for multiple people, often on both local and global engagements. And really, if you go through the particular steps, so you recommend a decision or an action, you formally agree that decision amongst those within the decision-making party. You perform the action, so you all become accountable. Everybody needs input into that recommendation. But in the centre, so it's a bit like a cross, the D is the decide. Now, in reality, you probably have the recommend and input together first. Then you get into the agreement stage, probably decide, and then perform. But the point is, it gives you a really good framework to work from. Other models include stop, start, continue, a bit more basic, but if you are new in role or you're wanting to understand a situation and be quite objective, you could turn around and say, what do we need to stop doing? What do we need to start doing? And what should we continue doing? Now, again, that encourages others and empowers others to be part of the process. It's a really good way of just trying to set out a baseline and understand what's going on. So, often lands quite well. There's also something called the Vroom, Yetton, Jago model. Bit of a mouthful, I know. But this identifies kind of the 5 different styles, ranging from autocratic to group-based decisions, based on the situation and level of involvement needed by leaders. So you go through different things like autocratic type 1 and 2, consultative type 1 and 2, and group-based type number 2. Put the description of where to find these things out in the notes below. But the point is, it's a great way to use this model to help organisations decide through the decision-making process. So do you want decision by committee? Do you want lots of people involved? Or do you want it to be quite autocratic, maybe dictatorial? There's sort of pros and cons and merits and benefits of all. So that's one model that might be applicable to you and your situation. Another one is called the OODA loop. So the OODA loop has been adopted by businesses to assist in speedy decision making. So as soon as you see an external problem on the horizon, a solution can be found, often before competitive advantage is lost. So it really consists of 4 stages: observe, orient, decide, and act. You're likely to be in these phases at some point all of the time, but it does give you that loop just to be able to keep understanding what's going on. So you observe what's going on, you orientate yourself in whatever needs to be done to be able to get there. You decide and then you act. Then all of a sudden you go back and you observe. It's a very simple model, but is extremely powerful. Next is the recognition primed decision model, RPD for short. It's a decision-making approach that functions well in situations where quick decision-making is essential, goals are poorly defined, and information is often incomplete. So you can imagine that can be applied to, I guess, more often than not, the workplace or situations that you just don't feel comfortable that you have all of the information to hand. Because the decisions there are based more on a mental model that has been developed through experience rather than through an alternative series of actions and consequences. Another, the paired comparison and analysis model. Now, this is a good way of weighing up the relative importance of conflicting criteria. When your priorities are not clear or are competing in different importance, there are 6 steps in this technique that will allow you to set the priorities and then begin to use those to kind of determine the conflicting resources in it. It's a bit of a mouthful. The paired comparative analysis, as it says, marries up, compares them, and then uses that as the action course to take. It's worth looking at. It was a new one to me, but in actual fact, you'll probably find you've been doing elements of this already. It just gives you a model and a name to work towards. And finally, the ladder of inference. The idea behind the ladder of inference is to help you avoid making poor judgments based on past experiences. We often bring in biases and other factors when we go through a decision-making process, especially if we've been there before. I've done this, I know what I'm doing, it worked this way last time, therefore it's definitely going to work this time. Please don't make that mistake. That really bugs me. It might be true, but why not judge every decision and situation on its merit? If it ends up being the same outcome, happy days. What are the trends associated with that? But don't make that judgment right up front. In this model, it describes the thinking process that we go through, usually without realizing it, to get to the fact or decision or action. It's all about tearing apart your lines of thinking in order to build them back up again to create a better foundation. And that's really important, because the foundational elements that we go through in our decision making is hugely important. If the assumptions are wrong, then that can throw us off course. Just like a small ripple in a pond can end up being a big wave on the other side of the shore. The foundational elements that you take into your decision making, they'll have huge consequences if they're slightly off center, so that all of a sudden your outcomes just verge ever so slightly off. As I mentioned, it's not a precise science, and it can be both an art and a science because there's nuances in both of them. But really, decision making is all about being applicable for you and your situation. So what do I want you to take away? There's a whole heap of models that you can apply, but the important part, finding the right model that's applicable to you in your situation at that time, that will give you the best possible outcome. Now, it's also really important to remember that to become a good decision maker, you need to take into account the 9 factors that I spoke through previously, but practice. We don't always get it right. In future videos, I'll talk about what happens when things go wrong, or you have uncertainty, or you lose clarity. But decision making is a practice, it's an art, it's a skill. Practice it. Ask others for help. Ask others to give you feedback. It's really easy to sit there and go through these things in your head and think, yeah, I've nailed it, or you've got all this doubt and uncertainty. Be honest. Say, do you mind if I just talk through with you the assumptions and the approach I'm going to take for this decision? Very rarely will people say no. If they do, phone me. More than happy to talk it through. And with that, I wish you all the best. I know you will become good decision makers. Please click the subscribe button here and give this video a thumbs up, because that would really mean a lot to me, especially as I begin to kind of bring out more and more of these videos and hopefully provide input and value to you in your daily lives. So with that, have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.